really just one kind of announcement. I don't know if you guys know yet, but you're down, well, you're not really down a TA, well, you are down a TA. So Chris has left the program, so you've got 3 TAs now. I'm only telling you this so that you don't email Chris for help, because he'll probably ignore you. Maybe he won't ignore you, but email the 3 girls. Yeah, he just moved back home to Toronto. You guys look really concerned. He's fine. He just moved back home to Toronto. Okay. So, cardiovascular Phys 4. I realized as soon as I walked in that I forgot to look up that weird Central Command MSNA thing. If any of you see me in the hallways, be like, Central Command MSNA, because it's bothering me why it went up, and I forgot to look it up. Sorry. Okay. So, these are the slides that we didn't get to last day. I think we got to this slide, but I thought I would have one overlapping slide just so we can all be on the same page. I shall click, 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 click. Okay, so basically we were talking about sympatholysis. Someone erased my beautiful drawings, but the idea that you've got sympathetic, which is decreasing blood flow to any vascular bed. That's what it's trying to do anyway. And then you've got, in an active muscle, local vasodilating factors that are going to be sort of fighting against the sympathetic nerve activity. So the sympathetic nerve activity is acting directly on the vascular muscle, trying to get a contraction, and then you've got local vasodilating factors that without any kind of afferent, we know the metabolites are going up through afferent nerves up to the brainstem to get integrated, but they're also acting locally without any afferent feedback to cause a local vasodilation. And so those two things are sort of competing, or you're gonna reach a balance, and whatever the balance is between sort of your local vasodilating factors in an exercising muscle and the constriction, which is coming top down, that's gonna determine how much blood flow you get through the bed, the vascular bed. So, and last day we were sort of like giving you statements and then showing you the papers that proved it. So in that vein, here's a really nice O'Leary study that people cite all the time. So here we have, again, dogs. Well, again, I think we had dogs last time. So these were conscious, chronically instrumented dogs. So what you can do is put different probes and stuff like that in the animals. Obviously, they're anesthetized, and then you can stitch them back up to be able to monitor these things all the time. So then they have them do mild and moderate steady-state treadmill running exercise. And so here we have rest, and then them increasing either their speed or their grade or both. And here are their responses. So you can see, let's go backwards this time because I keep on wanting to do this. So you can see heart rate increases steadily as the intensity of exercise increases. And that's what we would expect via all of the mechanisms we've been talking about. Vascular conductance also going up. And this is because we've got, so they're running on a treadmill, so you can imagine a dog running on a treadmill. You're using like basically all of their skeletal muscle. So running is a nice full body exercise, whether you're a dog or a human. Cardiac output, obviously because heart rate went up, cardiac output is going up nicely. And then we have this, as we talked about before, it's sort of a mild exercise, only a small or sort of no substantial increase in blood pressure, but then blood pressure increases over the course of exercise. So as expected, as workload increases in these dogs, you have progressive increases in all the variables. That's not really the interesting part, but I thought I would show you that before we get into this. So then in these same dogs, they did an intra-arterial infusion of an alpha-1 antagonist. So remember, sympathetic, what binds to alpha-1 receptors? What kind of neurotransmitter, or what neurotransmitter? There's a few possible correct answers. Well, 2 possible correct. So your mouth open. Oh,
sympathetic pulse can be
And what's the neurotransmitter? Do you know? What do they release?
NE.
Yes, perfect. Norepinephrine. Okay, perfect. So you're blocking those receptors. So you're blocking what the sympathetic nervous system is trying to do here. So the sympathetic nervous system, when it's trying to cause vascular smooth muscle constriction, it does it primarily through these alpha-1s. And if you block them, you're going to get rid of most of the sympathetic mediated vasoconstriction. So the MSNA is still there, but the vasoconstriction won't be. And so their goal was to determine whether the sympathetic nervous system tonically restrains active muscle vasodilation, because this was, I think we talked about this last day, we might not have, but basically the idea was maybe sympathetic, the body somehow knows to only send high sympathetic activity to the inactive muscles, and it doesn't send it to the active muscles. like I said, people were kind of stupid back in the, oh, this was 97, okay. 97. Were you guys alive in 97? Yeah, no, oh, that's heartbreaking. I was in grade 7. That's so upsetting. Okay, let's give me a moment to compose myself. Okay, yeah, so they wanted to see whether the sympathetic nervous system tonically restrains active muscle blood flow, because it doesn't really make sense, right? Like, why would the sympathetic nervous system be trying to constrict blood flow into an active muscle? And so basically they inject prazosin. This is a, oh, hold on. Right, so this figure is vascular conductance. Within, I think, yeah, one of the muscles that's active. And they were injecting this just into that hind limb. And so I showed you all the different intensities on the previous slide, so this is just during one of them at the moderately heavy exercise. So you can see here was their muscle vascular conductance, and then, so again, they're active, this is the active muscle, their dogs are running around. So if there was no increase in sympathetic nerve activity going to the active muscle, and the dog was somehow able to direct sympathetic activity only to the inactive ones, we wouldn't expect to see any change in vascular conductance when we block those receptors. But it turns out you block the receptors and you have a big increase in vascular conductance here, which means that the sympathetic nervous system was restricting blood flow into that active muscle, even though they were in moderately heavy exercise. Does that make sense? So the sympathetic nervous system is going to all vascular beds, including your active muscles. And it can restrain your blood flow. And because muscle is the sleeping giant that we talked about last day with our big sumo wrestler, you need to do this because otherwise you'll quickly overcome pressure and cardiac output. Hold on, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, that's what I just, yeah. So the alpha adrenergic blockade in exercising muscle, and again, in exercising muscle. This makes perfect sense in the non-exercising muscle because we want to redirect blood flow away from those. But even in the exercise muscle, it increases conductance and blood flow, which means that the sympathetic nervous system restrains vasodilation in the exercising muscle, and the extent of that increases with intensity. So you really need those local vasodilating factors in order to increase your muscle blood flow. But again, it's a protective mechanism to make sure that you maintain blood pressure. Otherwise, every time you got up to max exercise, these vessels would just dilate. You're in an elliptical, something that's really whole body. All of your active muscles are dilating, you just go boop every single time. Which when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, means that you've died and now you haven't reproduced and humans are dead. Okay. Any questions with that? Okay, so here's our summary. Sorry, this is from all last day. Actually, this is from like the last 3 lectures. Today's kind of like a swing lecture, so today's our last cardiovascular one. And then we get into oxygen, yada. So this is sort of like a swing lecture between the two. So this is sort of a summary of the last 3, which is we've got feed-forward regulation of blood pressure, so central command, muscle mechanoreflex, initiate the best guess, change in cardiac output and vasoconstriction. And then obviously feedback, where we've got the metaboreflexes to sense the magnitude of the metabolic stress. I'm not going to say all this, sorry, I'm too lazy. And then the baroreflex are going to set the blood pressure, sense blood pressure, and like in a beat by beat mechanism, we're keeping blood pressure constant, unless you're exercising, in which case the baroreceptors and the baroreflex gets reset to a higher, remember we get a shift upwards and to the right, in order to let us sit at a higher level of blood pressure and sympathetic nerve activity. And this I thought was just a beautiful sentence. I think if you're lost in any of the last 3 lectures, read this sentence and then kind of go back, that blood pressure regulation is really competing with local exercising muscle blood flow. And at the end of the day, pressure has to dominate, because if pressure doesn't dominate, you pass out. And if you're passed out, you're not exercising. So what's the point of having a system that's going to favor your skeletal muscle and let you exercise and vasodilate all these arteries and like get all your glucose and your oxygen and yada, get rid of all your waste. So vasodilate maximally when you're unconscious and getting mauled by a saber-toothed tiger. Not a good system. So blood pressure is always going to win unless your system's crap and you pass out. But in like a healthy context, blood pressure is always going to dominate, which leads into the potential for a compromise to muscle oxygen delivery during exercise. So you're exercising really intensely, you're vasodilating these arteries, but now you need to, blood pressure is starting to crash, the baroreceptors are kicking in and saying like, okay, we got to keep blood pressure up, let's increase sympathetic nerve activity. It increases it to the active muscle, and you start vasoconstricting those arteries, or at least trying to, competing with those local metabolic effects. So now you're impairing your oxygen delivery to that muscle, or at least there's a potential for that. So what does that mean when you're trying to train or perform exercise? Any questions with that? Good? Okay, I also transitioned from water to coffee during lectures. It's really good. This is helping me a lot, but I might get hot again today. You can tell it's the end of the semester where I'm just caffeinating like crazy. I guess it's not even, right? It's like October. Okay. Okay, so let's get into oxygen delivery and what dictates oxygen delivery. So everything I just told you, again, should be raising alarm bells. Oh God, I want to exercise. My muscles aren't getting oxygen and substrates, and I won't be able to get gains like the kids. Yasmin told me I use like kid lingo sometimes. So real cool. Gains. Okay, and chill. Okay, sorry. Really tired. Okay, so here's a nice JPhys paper. If you ever come across a JPhys paper, this is like a premier journal in physiology, so you can always be happy that this is going to be good. From 2005. So limitations to systemic and locomotor limb muscle oxygen delivery. So by locomotor, we mean active, like, obviously, in humans. So the ones that let you move around. So basically, systemic and local oxygen delivery and uptake during max exercise. I don't know any of these people, but what I will say is that, and you're going to see this, and well, actually, I think I'll just tell you. So this is at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. And I don't know, but so what you're always told is that in Denmark, like ethics, you can do whatever you want. So all of the crazy papers, and you don't really get to get the full magnitude of this, but if you want to look at this paper, so they have like arterial lines and like the legs, the arms, like they do crazy stuff in Denmark. So if you guys ever want to do massively invasive like cardiovascular research and exercise research, don't try to do it in Canada. Go over to Denmark because they do it, I swear, they do it all there. And like just like art, like oh my god, I would never do an art line. You can do an art line if you want, an arterial line, but like they put a catheter in your artery. That's crazy. I would never do that. I've heard like, anyway, I shouldn't tell you horror stories on camera. Anyway, it's fine, no one dies. But obviously if you botch an art line, now you have an arterial that's like open and yeah. So my one story I was gonna tell was that my friend, they were putting one in her supervisor and it fell out, and so someone had to sit on his artery because they were, I think, in his femoral artery because he was just like gushing. Crazy. That was not in Denmark. Okay. Okay, but don't be alarmed. If anyone ever asks you to do it, I'm sure they're well trained. Okay. So here we go. Systemic and exercising leg VO2. So we can obviously measure systemic O2 at the mouth. So this is all of the oxygen that's being used by the body. And then we can measure it at the leg. And so I haven't gone over all the methods and stuff like that, but they had all these art lines, all of these measurements. Yeah, I can't even remember all of them. I ended up deciding it was tangential to the point of the lecture, but again, if you're into it, you can go read that paper and see what they did. And then they had them cycle in like an incremental cycle exercise. So x-axis, we're going from rest up to 100%, and they're going obviously to exhaustion, they're going up to 100. So you can see a nice linear increase in whole body VO2 from rest to peak exercise. A little tapering off here, but as we go from rest to peak, we're obviously using more oxygen, and there you go, a nice linear increase. Then if we look at leg VO2, so obviously this is the leg, and we're doing cycling exercise, so this is an active muscle. We get a linear increase in leg VO2 up to about 50% of peak power, and then a bit of a plateauing thereafter, which would be a sympathetic mechanism as we were talking about. Because as we've been saying, you really can't just let muscle keep on dilating and dilating and dilating. Can I stop harping on that point? We get it, right? You'll pass out. Because muscle's a sleeping giant. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna sort of like step back through our main variables and kind of get more and more into depth on what the issue is here. So the idea is what's gonna limit VO2 and oxygen uptake in these people. So pay attention to the left side here. We have leg blood flow in our sort of mild exercise, low intensity, up into moderate and up into exhaustion, moderate to high and then up into exhaustion. So remember that muscle blood flow, we're going back to those models, is going to be equal to the pressure gradient. So again, this has to do with what's blood pressure. Again, that high energy state, that's going to be what's forcing blood through that vascular bed. So you can either have really high blood pressure and or really low venous pressure. So they also had like venous catheters that were, I think they advanced it up into like the heart and stuff like that. Which is actually not as scary as you might think. I know people that do that in my kind of lab, but no. Okay, so pressure differential. So again, increase the high energy component, decrease the low energy component, you're gonna get an increase in this pressure. And then of course vascular conductance, which is the magnitude of the vasodilation in that artery. The balance between sympathetic and vascular, local. Okay, so, and then so flow, here's pressure, and here we have mean arterial pressure, and the vascular conductance, and here we have vascular conductance. So they measured legit everything. They also did these studies in like 3 different like batches. Like if you read the paper, they brought 3 different groups of people in because I think they couldn't do everything in one, but these people were still just instrumented like crazy. They probably got paid really well for this. Okay, so let's look at A here. So this is the sort of like low to moderate intensity exercise. So we have this, like we talked about before, this linear increase in leg blood flow up to about 50%. And we get this because we have an increase in blood pressure. And again, we talked about all the mechanisms that lead to that increase in blood pressure last day. We're really doing the integrative phys thing, really building on everything at this point. So I would also encourage you guys to keep up with the lecture material. I know you have midterms and stuff like that, and you're probably rolling your eyes, but like at this point, if you kind of get lost anywhere, you're really going to be lost as you go along. So like come see us if any of this doesn't make sense, or your TAs, not Chris. Because yeah, like again, if you were really confused on blood pressure regulation during exercise, then this doesn't make any sense to you, and now you can't follow this lecture. Okay, sorry, that was my little motherly talk. Okay, so we get this increase in blood flow because we have an increase in mean arterial pressure, as well as an increase in vascular conductance, but the increase, I mean, it doesn't really look like it on this graph because of the scales, but you have a greater increase in blood pressure than you do vascular conductance. So inflow is greater than outflow, and that's why linear blood flow increases. So if vascular conductance had increased more, it's multiplying, I'm an idiot. Since they're both increasing, that gives you your increase in flow. So you're basically doing everything you can to pump up blood flow through this muscle. Okay, so then B, we're getting up into our sort of like moderate to high intensity between 50 and looks like 90% there. And you can see here, we start to have the rate of increase in leg blood flow decreases, but it still remains positive. So we're still increasing leg blood flow. And why? That's because we've got a big increase in pressure that's trying to shove blood flow through. We know we're increasing exercise intensity, so again, all the mechanisms we talked about in the last few lectures. You've got an even bigger increase in mean arterial pressure. But we're starting to plateau in the leg vascular conductance. Sorry, I put my butt in the wrong spot. And we're starting to plateau in the leg vascular conductance, but because the increase in pressure is bigger than the sort of plateauing of the leg vascular conductance, you still have an increase in leg blood flow, but it's just less a steep increase. And then of course we get up to exhaustion here, and if you think about why do you even get exhausted in the first place, like what is exhaustion? I know we always think of it being kind of, that's what you guys will think, but you think about it getting like exhausted, but it's your muscles not able to do the exercise anymore, And part of that is because your leg blood flow cannot increase anymore to sustain this level of exercise. So your poor blood pressure, it's trying to increase, your body's trying to let you go and do this exercise, but your leg vascular conductance is starting to go down because your sympathetic nervous system, to get this mean arterial pressure up this high, is firing like crazy. So your leg vascular conductance is starting to come down. And the multiplication of these two things, of a decrease here, I can't really see my pointer that well, but anyway, a decrease here and an increase here, is that you get this plateau / small decrease. So leg blood flow plateaus or decreases because the increase in pressure doesn't fully compensate. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so we've said that we can increase our blood pressure but leg vascular conductance is going down. We know why that is. That's sympathetic nerve activity. That's just like blasting the muscle. And even though the local vasodilating factors are trying to dilate, the sympathetic's overwhelming it because blood pressure always wins. So let's look at what's determining blood pressure here. What I was going to say was, obviously, if we could increase pressure, this is going to happen, but if we could increase pressure more, then we could shove more blood flow through. Like we could compensate for the fact that that conductance is at its max and it can't go up anymore. But if we could just like increase pressure like crazy, then we could like shove all this blood flow through. So why doesn't pressure increase even more to let leg blood flow keep on going up? That was a much better segue into this next slide. Okay, so let's look at blood pressure. So what's the formula for blood pressure? Cardiac output divided by vascular conductance. Whenever I draw it on the board, I always go times TPR, total peripheral resistance, rather than total conductance, but that's just because I do sympathetic, but same thing, because remember those are the inverse of each other, resistance and conductance inverse. Okay, so blood pressure, again here we have cycling at peak power. This is mean arterial pressure, so this is like the inflow side of things. Down here we have central venous pressure, so what the outflow side is. Remember, if we want to increase the pressure gradient, we can increase mean arterial pressure or decrease central venous pressure. So in A, again, this is kind of like a low to moderate activity. We've got only a slight increase in mean arterial pressure. This is mediated by a nice increase in cardiac output here. But also an increase in vascular conductance, because these people are, cycling. So these are big muscles, especially on me, jacked. So you've got all these really active muscles that are all vasodilating, again, for all the reasons we talked about in the last few lectures. And the increase in the leg vascular conductance, because we have a slight increase in blood pressure. So if this overwhelmed cardiac output, then obviously we'd have a drop in pressure. But we don't. We have a small increase / maybe mean arterial pressure is being maintained a little bit. And that's because these are basically matched right now. So you have a nice increase in cardiac output paired to the vascular conductance, or again, a bit of a greater increase in cardiac output. If we say this is going up, which we have said here, MIP increase is only slight because the increase in cardiac output is greater than the increase in conductance. And I should pause here just to go back to the model. Remember, cardiac output, when we're talking about blood pressure, this is our inflow, and vascular conductance is our outflow. Okay, so then we get into our moderate to high intensity exercise. So blood pressure continues to increase, beep beep. And now it's actually increasing, I would say, noticeably. Like, I don't know how much you guys are used to looking at standard error or standard deviation bars, but this looks like it's definitely bigger than this. And that's because you get this nice increase in cardiac output, while vascular conductance is the increase is getting less steep. So now cardiac output is really, I was going to say kicking the ass of vascular conductance. I don't know why. I'm in a really weird mood today. But it's like, so the increase in vascular conductance is much less than the increase in cardiac output. So again, inflow is bigger than outflow, so that makes sense that blood pressure is now allowed to increase. And then what about exhaustion? So again, this is from the last graph, although we were talking, I think, about local a lot, but Systemic vascular conductance, we're really seeing this because this is cycling and cycling to exhaustion, so these are big muscles. Doing like hand grip exercise to exhaustion would not have the same effect because it's a really small muscle mass. Sorry, you don't have to, if that stressed anybody out, just ignore me, this is kind of a fun fact. But these are big muscles, so when we're talking about systemic vascular conductance, this is the result of all of the vasodilation that's happening in all those active muscles, which are big leg muscles. So they're contributing a lot to the systemic vascular conductance, if that makes sense. So again, we've got massive sympathetic activation going on. Systemic vascular conductance is decreasing, and this also, by the way, is including the active muscles and the inactive muscles. So that's why you've got such a pronounced decrease. You wouldn't see such a pronounced increase if we were only looking at the active muscles, but you've got the active muscles that are having all that sympathetic activity, and all the inactive muscles. So we're going to talk about those beds. Did we talk about that last year? I think it's this day. So like your viscera, and then the inactive muscles. So the arms right now are not active. So redirecting blood flow away from those, and on the whole, vascular conductance is coming down. And cardiac output is starting to plateau a little bit here too. So the result, because our decreases in conductance are much bigger than our plateauing of cardiac output, which is still kind of like going up / plateauing, means the blood pressure is going up. And actually reaching its steepest point here. And this is sort of the way I think about it, the body just trying to shove blood flow through those active muscles. Good? Okay. I'm probably going to go to the next slide and then come back because I want to talk about. All right, so we know that this vascular conductance is going down. We know why this is going down. Again, this is like systemic vasoconstriction in the inactive muscle beds, redirecting blood flow away from that. Even in the active beds, really starting to fight those local metabolites. But if we could keep our cardiac output even higher, because this is going to happen no matter what, because we're exercising. But if we could get that cardiac output to go even higher, then again, we could get blood pressure to go even higher, and maybe we wouldn't reach exhaustion. We could jam that blood through those active muscles. So what is causing cardiac output to plateau there? So in the last slide, we showed that blood pressure was sort of the problem, the thing that was limiting it. Now we're seeing that within blood pressure, it's cardiac output that's the issue. So what determines cardiac output? Heart rate and stroke volume. Okay, so this time we're just dividing it up into A and B, into sort of our nice linear increase in cardiac output. And we get this nice linear increase in cardiac output due to heart rate and stroke volume. So you got this nice linear increase in heart rate and less nice, like look at these standard deviation bars, but increase in stroke volume as you're going through this exercise. And I think this is all the same cycling pattern. You guys get that? Okay. Okay. But then what happens near the end of exercise when you're getting up towards exhaustion? So you can see that cardiac output has this plateau. We showed this on the last slide. So plateau, so it's either not going up anymore or it might be slightly decreasing. So where is that coming from? Let's look at the heart rate. Heart rate is still going up, and you guys probably know this from all of your time exercising, that your heart rate just keeps on going up and up and up. So what's the issue here? The issue is stroke volume. So stroke volume increased nicely. Remember, stroke volume is the amount of blood that the heart's pumping out every single time it beats. So as stroke volume is going up, stroke volume goes up through the beginning of exercise, and then here at exhaustion, like this should be raising your eyebrows here. This is problematic, right? Because if we said the whole time, let's just like get blood pressure high and jam blood through those blood vessels. But stroke volume is really sandbagging us here because it's going down and heart rate's doing its thing. It's going up and up and up, but the stroke volume's starting to come down. And if only we could keep stroke volume going up, we wouldn't get this limitation to cardiac output, we wouldn't get the limitation to mean arterial pressure, and we'd be able to exercise longer. Does that make sense? Nice. Ooh, I got 3 nods there. Okay. So, a summary of the flow, pressure, and cardiac output limitations to exercise is a summary of the slides we just looked at. So what determines muscle blood flow, vascular conductance, and mean arterial pressure? We've got outflow and inflow through most of this slide, referring back to those models again. If you don't understand the models, for God's sake, come see me or Dennis. You need to understand the models. If you don't understand the models, you're really hooped. And if you do understand them, it's going to make all of this much, much, much easier. Okay, so your outflow here is vascular conductance. Your inflow is, muscle blood flow, and this is muscle vascular conductance. And so your inflow is blood pressure. And so we found that sorry, I shouldn't have clicked already. We found that the problem really here is blood pressure. Problem. And what determines blood pressure? That's cardiac output and total vascular conductance. Conductance being the outflow, cardiac output being the inflow, and we found there that cardiac output was the problem. And what determines cardiac output? Heart rate and stroke volume, and stroke volume is sort of the problem. So, here's your big statement. Stroke volume is the limit to cardiac output, which represents the high energy pressure for muscle blood flow through the mass and heat flow model. Thus, limitations to maximal stroke volume and therefore cardiac output may impose limitations to peak exercising blood flow, and therefore peak convective delivery of oxygen to the exercising muscle, and therefore a limitation. It's a cardiovascular system limitation to human exercise. So as a cardiovascular researcher, that's such a real bummer, but it's your cardiovascular system that at the end of the day is really making you become exhausted and not able to continue on with the exercise in a trained individual. Any questions? Okay, so now you're thinking, well, that seems like a real bummer. What if we can just increase stroke volume? Can we exercise more? And what's a way to increase stroke volume? So I think we mentioned this in class. Does anyone remember if I mentioned the pericardium one day? It's a real random thing that I thought that I mentioned, but someone nodding? I did mention it. Good. Okay, good. Sorry. So the pericardium is a rigid, fluid-filled double membrane surrounding the heart, which decreases myocardial compliance. Dennis says, think of a balloon in a bag, so you can probably imagine that you've got something that's rigid surrounding the heart. So the heart's extremely compliant. You can get this, it goes boop, 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 boop. You guys know how hearts work, okay. So around the heart, you've got the pericardium, which under normal circumstances is just like flexing away. But as we're trying to increase stroke volume, eventually the pericardium becomes a limitation, or the idea was the pericardium would become a limitation. And I guess if you want to think of your balloon in the bag, if this is your pericardium and like here's your heart, or like, sorry, I drew a balloon in a bag. But if this is our, let's say here is your rest, you're just hanging out. Here's diastole, here's systole. If you're going back and forth between these two things, then you're fine. And then let's say you go up to moderate intensity exercise, so you're out here. I don't know, my diagram is really falling apart here. High intensity exercise. Eventually, as you're trying to increase stroke volume and deliver more blood back to the heart with every beat, and pump out more blood with every beat of the heart, you're going to bump up against the pericardium. I probably didn't need to draw it. You get it. Anyway, so the idea was, does the pericardium limit stroke volume? So when you look at exercise intensity from rest to peak, what we showed you in that previous diagram is that heart rate goes up nice and linearly. Heart rate's not the problem. And stroke, plateaus. I knew that, or ease. Oh boy. All right, anyway, so stroke volume plateaus. So, you might be saying, what happens if we get rid of the pericardium? You guys weren't asking that? Well, that's what people did ask. So they went back to their dogs. Not to their dogs, these are different dogs. So they wanted to look at whether there is pericardial constraint, so whether the pericardium is constraining stroke volume on peak exercising cardiac output. Again, it's not doing anything at rest. Hopefully, you're not busting up against your pericardium at rest. And then again, we already showed that if you can increase stroke volume, then you can increase cardiac output more, then you can increase blood pressure more, then you can increase muscle blood flow more. So this is like the problem, and this could be the solution. Let's all just get rid of our pericardiums. Okay, so this is Jerry Mitchell, a nice old famous researcher, 1986. Okay, so in the study, chronically instrumented dogs did a maximal incremental treadmill exercise test before and after a surgical removal of the pericardium. And again, that's going to increase compliance of the heart because we're not butting up against it anymore. So, ignore the red line for 1 second. So we know, based on the Frank-Starling law of the heart, which we talked about a while ago, I don't remember when, as you increase end diastolic volume, so you increase the amount of blood in the heart at the end of diastole, right before systole, you're going to have a bigger stroke volume, and that's because the heart contracts harder. It's like a stretch and then it shoves against it. So the higher your end diastolic pressure, then the higher your stroke volume. Sorry, let me start that over. The higher, ignoring the Frank-Starling law of the heart, I was going to say, why did I click that in? It's because I wanted to say this first. I was trying to help myself. As you increase end diastolic pressure, you increase end diastolic volume, or I should say, as you increase end diastolic volume, you increase end diastolic pressure. Oh, that's the wrong way of saying it. I said it right the first time. But you have a nice linear relationship between these two things. If you cut the pericardium, for the same increase in pressure, what am I even saying here? Oh yeah, you increase volume a lot earlier. So it takes less pressure to increase the volume because you're not stretching up against that rigid barrier now. And again, the more we can increase, sorry, now going back to Frank-Starling law of the heart, the more we can increase our end diastolic volume, then the more we can increase stroke volume. So we sort of solve the problem there. They don't want me to explain that one more time because I explained it kind of crappily. Yeah, okay. So ignoring the Frank-Starling law of the heart, as we increase end diastolic pressure, the pressure in the heart, you get a linear increase to end diastolic volume. So you're returning more blood to the heart, you're increasing the pressure in that left ventricle, and you're getting a nice linear relationship between these two things. But if you do, if you cut the pericardium, so that's just, yeah, there's a role of the pericardium in that, because when we cut the pericardium, we actually get a steeper relationship. So let's see. At this end diastolic pressure, whatever this number is, whatever, X, you increase to here, to X, and you get an end diastolic volume of here, of this, Y. But if you cut the pericardium, that's the blue line. If you cut the pericardium, now of an end diastolic pressure of X, you get an end diastolic volume of higher. We'll call it Z. I don't know. And the benefit of having this steeper relationship is the Frank-Starling law of the heart, that the higher your volume, the higher your stroke volume, and the higher stroke volume, the higher your cardiac output, the higher your blood pressure, yada, yada, yada. So you've increased the compliance of the heart by cutting the pericardium. You've really primed the the Frank-Starling law of the heart is still the same, but you're really able to take advantage of it because you've got more of an increase in diastolic volume. And again, so with the pericardium intact, forgetting the pericardium, the bigger the left ventricle goes, the harder it's going to contract, the bigger your stroke volume. We all cool with that statement? With the pericardium, it can only get this big. Without the pericardium, it can get this big. So you are able to get a bigger increase in stroke volume by cutting the pericardium. That was better, right? Okay. Second time's the charm. I appreciate your confused faces when I talk, so I know I have to go back. Okay, so they did it in the dogs. They cut the pericardium. Yeah.
What happened to the dogs after, without their pericardium?
Like during exercise or in their lives?
Both.
Well, in terms of the exercise, I'll cover that now. In terms of their lives, I don't know how honest you want me to be about this. I once told my friend that all of the rats we studied we released into a field afterwards because she's like a vegetarian and she was really happy with that. So if you want to think about that they're in a field, that's probably where they are. Let's move on. Okay, so here they are at max exercise intensity. So they did, what did we say? Incremental exercise test. So we're just going to show you at max exercise. So this is this is their pericardium intact. Their VO2, so 105. Whatever, these numbers really aren't meaning a whole lot right now. Although it's really fun. Remember we talked about heart rate gets higher with the smaller animals. So rats have really, really high heart rates. Mice have even higher heart rates. Anyway, here's a nice dog max exercise heart rate. Whatever, blood pressure, resistance. These numbers kind of mean nothing to us right now. Cut the pericardium. And think about what I just said. We could probably get higher stroke volume. I know the answers are all right up there, but it makes sense. If we can get higher stroke volume, we should be able to get higher cardiac output and get higher blood pressure. And these animals should be able to exercise at a higher VO2, because now blood pressure isn't limiting our increase in VO2 anymore. That makes sense? Et voila! My français. So stroke volume, I think we have a, stroke volume first. We have a nice increase in stroke volume of 17%. And these asterisks mean it was significant, because we have no standard deviations on this figure. So anyway, that, let's forget about resistance right now. So that gets coupled to a nice increase in cardiac output, obviously, heart rate times stroke volume. And because mean arterial pressure is being maintained, so this might look like a decrease, but it's not significant, so it's being maintained, it hasn't changed. We're allowed to have systemic vascular resistance. Remember, this is the inverse of conductance. Is allowed to be lower. So this means that vascular conductance was 18% higher in the dogs as they were exercising at peak. So their active muscles are able to get more blood flow because we're shoving more blood flow through with the cardiac output. So we don't have an increase in pressure. We would have an increase in pressure if we hadn't changed this vascular resistance. But we did change the vascular resistance because we were providing more blood flow. We were providing more blood flow to the active muscle. And the result of that was a nice significant increase in VO2. So basically they were able to exercise at higher VO2 and get mad gains. This is Dennis's slide with the pig, which I thought was really funny. And I wondered why he put it on there, but it's because they didn't say that they were doing this in pigs. So here's another one where they cut the pericardium in pigs, also running on a treadmill. So once again, we've got VO2, cardiac output, heart rate, stroke volume, and blood pressure. We're exercising at maximal exercise. This was graded again. I really hate my pointer today. So. Cut the pericardium. Once again, a much bigger increase in stroke volume. This time a 33% increase in stroke volume, so a massive increase in stroke volume. These stroke volumes are much closer to what you would see in a human. Pig hearts, I think, are roughly the same size as ours. Well, obviously, I guess, because their stroke volume is about the same. So you cut the pericardium, and now you get a 33% increase in stroke volume, coupled to a similar change in cardiac output. Blood pressure stays the same, so we know that because blood pressure is equal to cardiac output times vascular resistance, that resistance has gone way down, again providing more blood flow to the active muscles, and we've had this gorgeous increase in VO2. So these pigs are just running up a storm. Okay, so in summary, removing the pericardium, increase in VO2 max via an increase in maximal stroke volume. Again, it wouldn't have any effect on stroke volume at like just low kind of resting levels or low intensity because we're not even close to the pericardium, we're operating here. But as we get up to max, now that's where you can really increase your stroke volume. And therefore your cardiac output, secondary to an increase in cardiac compliance and a diastolic volume, so that's what's generating the increase in stroke volume. And a decrease in maximal systemic vascular resistance, or an increase in maximal conductance with little or no change in blood pressure. So the reason we've got this increase in VO2 max is because we're shoving more blood flow through, and we've allowed the muscles to vasodilate more in order to allow more blood flow through, so we're using more oxygen, delivering more substrate, taking more garbage away. And collectively, these data support the hypothesis that it's oxygen supply, not utilization, that's the major determinant of VO2 max. So at VO2 max, you're running on a treadmill, and all of a sudden you're exhausted and you can't do it anymore. Is the issue that your muscles are just like dead and they no longer are able to bring oxygen to the cell, they're no longer able to like run the ETC and all that jazz? Or is it the actual delivery of the oxygen to those muscles? And these data are showing that if you deliver more oxygen to the muscles, you are able to increase VO2 max. If the muscle was the problem, then you wouldn't see an increase in VO2 max above and beyond this, if the muscle just wasn't able to take in that extra oxygen. But it is. It's clearly, we're able to increase VO2 max further by 33% if we take away the limitation of the heart. Does that make sense? Want to say it again? Should I say it again? No, I'm not going to say it again. So the heart's the limitation because stroke body's the limitation because the pericardium's the limitation. Okay. And our muscles are just doing dead, basically. Our muscles, how about this for I'm not repeating, but I'm saying something different. Our muscles are able to use more oxygen and do more than we're giving them with cardiac output. Does that make sense? Is that better? Our poor muscles. But again, because we're always favoring blood pressure always wins. Unless you pass out, and then it did not win. It lost that day. Happens to the best of us. Okay, okay. So, this is gonna just kind of be the same thing over and over, I think, as I recall. I actually made this